When you design cloud-based solutions, there's often a need to communicate with the internet or external networks. That's where public IP services in Azure come into play. You use them to enable inbound or outbound internet connectivity to your Azure resources, whether it's a virtual machine, a load balancer, an application gateway, or a firewall. Let's break it down so you can confidently use public IPs in the right context. When you're working with Azure public IP addresses, you'll need to choose between two SKU types, basic and standard. Each serves different needs, and understanding their behavior helps you make the right decision for your workloads. If you are setting up basic SKU, you'll be using it for non-zonal resources. It's region-based and comes with an open by default behavior, meaning traffic from the internet can reach your resource unless you specifically block it using security rules. This setup might be suitable for testing or less critical environments, but you must be cautious as it's easier to expose services unintentionally. On the other hand, standard SKU is designed with security and high availability in mind. It's zonal aware, which means it supports zone resilient architecture, and it requires you to explicitly allow traffic using network security groups or Azure Firewall. This gives you tighter control and makes it the recommended choice for production environments. Always lean towards standard SKU when security, availability, and control are priorities. When you're assigning public IP addresses in Azure, you have the flexibility to choose between static and dynamic assignment based on your needs. If you go with a static assignment, the IP address stays fixed. It never changes. This is especially useful when you're working with DNS mappings, creating secure access lists, or anytime you need reliable, consistent IP addressing. On the other hand, if you choose dynamic assignment, the IP address is pulled from a pool and can change, especially when the associated resource is stopped and restarted. This approach is typical for non-critical workloads or scenarios using the basic SKU. For most production environments, your best bet is to use a static IP with the standard SKU. This gives you both consistency and control, which are essential for secure and stable deployments. In Azure Resource Manager, a public IP address is treated as its own standalone resource, complete with its own properties and configurations. When you're designing solutions that require communication with the internet, you'll often associate a public IP address with specific Azure services. For example, if you are configuring virtual machine network interfaces or virtual machine scale sets, you can assign public IPs to allow those VMs to be directly reachable from the internet, though it's essential to secure them properly. When you are deploying a public load balancer, you'll use a public IP to route incoming traffic from users to your backend pool of virtual machines. For secure connectivity scenarios, you'll associate public IPs with virtual network gateways for VPN or express route, or NAT gateways, which allow your private subnets to reach out to the internet without exposing each resource individually. Similarly, services like application gateways and Azure Firewall rely on public IPs to inspect, route, or secure inbound traffic from external networks. When you want to enable secure administrative access to your VMs, you'll use a Bastion host, which also requires a public IP. And in advanced network architectures, you might assign a public IP to a route server to enable dynamic route exchange with your NVA or on-prem routers. Public IPs can be created as either IPv4 or IPv6, and you get to choose whether the assignment is static, staying the same, or dynamic, which can change over time. By understanding these associations, You ensure your Azure resources communicate with the outside world in a secure and well architected manner. Just because a resource in Azure has a public IP doesn't mean it should be openly accessible to the world. You need to apply strong security controls to minimize risk. Start by using network security groups or Azure Firewall to allow only the specific ports and IP ranges that are absolutely necessary. This limits exposure and helps enforce the principle of least privilege. Instead of assigning public IPs directly to every virtual machine, you should prefer using Azure Bastion. It provides secure browser-based RDP and SSH access without exposing your VMS to the internet. Also, make sure you actively monitor public IP usage. Use tools like Azure Monitor and Microsoft Defender for Cloud to detect unusual patterns or unauthorized access attempts. This visibility helps you respond quickly to threats. Keep in mind that public IP addresses are region-specific and billable, especially if you reserve static IPs. You can associate them with various resources such as NICs, load balancer frontends, application gateways, Azure Firewall, and others. Always design with a zero trust mindset, assume breach, restrict access, and expose only what's necessary. This approach helps you maintain a secure and well-controlled Azure environment. When choosing the appropriate SKU for a public IP address in Azure, you need to consider how your application will use and secure that IP. If you go with the standard SKU, your public IP is always static, ensuring it doesn't change, even across reboots. This is ideal for services that rely on consistent DNS records or whitelisted IPs. In contrast, the basic SKU allows more flexibility. For IPv4, you can choose between static or dynamic, but for IPv6, it's always dynamic. Both SKUs support an adjustable idle timeout for inbound flows ranging from 4 to 30 minutes, with a default of 4 minutes, and a fixed 4-minute timeout for outbound flows. Security is another major difference. The standard SKU follows a secure by default model, meaning it blocks inbound traffic unless explicitly allowed through a network security group. If you are using it on a virtual machine, for example, you'll need to configure NSG rules to permit traffic. On the other hand, the basic SKU is open by default, so while you can apply NSGs, doing so is optional and not enforced, making it less secure out of the box. If you are building for resiliency across availability zones, only the standard SKU supports zonal, non-zonal, or zone redundant configurations, and only in regions with 3 availability zones. The basic SKU doesn't support zone awareness. You also get more routing control with the standard SKU, letting you choose how traffic flows between Azure and the internet, while basic doesn't support this at all. Finally, if you're planning to use global load balancers to span multiple regions, only standard SKU public IPs support global tier capabilities, whereas basic SKUs do not. So, if your workload demands high availability, tight security, or advanced routing, the standard SKU is the right choice. But for simpler or development use cases, the basic SKU might be sufficient. So what's your key takeaway? Public IP services in Azure give your cloud resources a presence on the internet. But with great power comes great responsibility. You need to assign and manage them wisely. Choose the right SKU, prefer static allocation for consistency, and wrap everything in strong access controls.